I'm Courtney Flatt reporting.
Gun safety advocates from around the region are participating in a number of protests this weekend. The nationwide March for Our Lives demonstration will take place tomorrow in Redmond, Everett, Woodinville, Bainbridge Island, Lake Forest Park, Bremerton, Bellingham, and elsewhere. People can find information at marchforourlives.com. It's 12:06. This is KUOW News.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Angie, formerly Angie's List, dedicated to helping homeowners tackle home projects from everyday repairs to dream remodels. Reviews, pricing, and booking are at Angie.com or on the Angie app.
Welcome to Friday. Welcome to KUOW's Week in Review. Hi, this is Bill Radke. We have journalists together in one spot on a Friday, as we do. We're figuring out what happened this week and what it means to you. We've got South Seattle Emerald opinions editor Mike Davis with us. Welcome back, Mike.
Hey, Bill. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. Kitsap Sun military and Bremerton reporter Josh Farley. Welcome back, Josh.
Hey, Bill. Good to be with you.
You too. And it's even rainy in Yakima, I understand. We've got Crosscut Central and Eastern Washington reporter Mai Hoang. Welcome back, Mai.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
True story. Cloudy, rainy on the east side.
Yeah, it's actually wet.
One of my colleagues sent a message to everybody, said, I'm so done with this friggin' rain. And there's really no response to that if you're kind of enjoying the rain, as I am, because no one wants to hear that. I can say it because no one's in the room. It's just to you, anonymous many people. But if you're in a group of friends who are complaining about the rain, you just got to nod your head and sympathize. That's your job. Okay, by the way, we're live streaming the show. You can watch us on YouTube, Facebook, just search KUOW Public Radio. And let's get into the news of the week. A new state law took effect this week in Washington, and it lets K through 12 public school students miss class for mental health reasons. They get unlimited excused absences, no need for a note or a medical diagnosis. Mike, why did the legislature pass this law?
Well, they passed it. It comes a year after Governor Inslee declared a youth mental health crisis. And this was last year. Schools were still virtual. This is before Inslee had mandated that students or that schools reopen, that students can come back. And what we were seeing, especially here in Seattle, Children's Hospital had reported that they were getting 1 to 2 youth ages 12 to 17 per night coming into the hospital after attempting suicides. Their emergency room for youth over at Children's Hospital had reported a 31% uptick in youth having to come in over mental health issues. And, these numbers and these upticks that we were seeing were pretty consistent throughout the pandemic up until that point. So Governor Inslee made that announcement, and then we got House Bill 1834. And then, we got this whole slew of laws. But I will say, Bill, this isn't just unique to Washington. There's actually 11 other states that already have these laws. Now, what's unique in Washington is that we're the only state as of right now whose laws state that the students do not need a doctor's note. They don't need a medical diagnosis. And we're the only state to have these mental health absences be unlimited. So as many absences as our students need, they're all excused if it's mental health. So that's a huge win for students in Washington.
Well, I want to hear from my other panelists too, but we got so many listener responses to this that are worth talking about. So I'm going to start us off with a listener named Chelsea in Pierce County, who says, I live with bipolar disorder and spent my high school years depressed. This new law sets up kids to take advantage of the school policies as well as hide their mental health struggles. Students, parents, and school counselors should be aware of a mental health issue with them and be able to excuse them on an individual basis. I went untreated for many years into adulthood because of stigma and lack of resources and accessibility for mental health care. This new law doesn't promote getting help for mental health challenges that affect an individual and treatment if needed. It actually says, stay home with your quote unquote problem, and we won't have to talk about it. That's not a solution. That's a further stigma. So, Mike, was that kind of objection taken into account when this law was formed, and are there ways to guard against that?
Well, I think what was taken into account was the fact that so many kids were struggling and so many kids were winding up in the hospital. So I absolutely understand where that listener is coming from. But I would say on the other side of that, kids can be misdiagnosed. Some kids just don't have access to the adults. I would love to hear from the rest of the panel about their situation in their local school districts as far as the availability of counselors. We have a whole movement of students in Seattle right now that are fighting tooth and nail to get more counselors per kid in each school. So the idea that any kid that's having these issues just has access to help is actually false, especially if we're talking about the Seattle Public School District.
Yeah, I mean, jumping off your point, Mike, yeah, I mean, I think the provider issue is definitely one we have to address, and not just counselors, but we're just talking even just for just a general population, getting access to counseling, a therapist, like people that can help. It's been really tough. I mean, I know in just among my colleagues, like it's so hard to get an appointment. And that's like adults who have insurance and things. So imagine kids who don't know what's wrong with them, their access to providers. So I mean, I agree with the listener. There are other issues that need to be addressed. Like this shouldn't be seen as an end all type of situation. But at the same time, I mean, if you think about it, if they have the option to not go to school, like that's time they can use to find a provider, that's time their parents can work with their kids. So it doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm just hiding in my room, waiting it out. Like the time could be used productively. It's not like you're just telling the kid, like, stay home and don't do anything about it. You're saying, hey, here's some time for you to, to settle what you're dealing with, or to, find somebody that can help you.
And it's not a free for all. I have to just jump in real fast. Like I know that it reads like it is a free for all, but individual school districts do have the power to implement measures to support these new policies, such as if you have a kid and they've missed an X number of days in a row, the school district can absolutely follow up with the parents and follow up with the families, and that type of infrastructure is in place so that we can find out, why has this particular kid been out? But at the same time, we have to support these kids. We have to stop these kids from winding up in local hospitals.
And I would add, just from the education coverage I've done and my sources over here, that I think we talked about this before the show, there is a shift occurring. Maybe those of us, we might have skipped school a few times. The rules around truancy, Becca Bill, was a lot more strict. You might have gone to juvie hall for something. I think this really shifts the accountability on the families and students to make their determination when they need to be at school. And but I do also have to wonder, I think this goes a long ways towards reducing the stigma, whether you're seeking mental or for you putting that on par with physical health. But, we've missed so much. The collective we of the students of the state of Washington have missed an awful lot of school. And that's a missed day is a missed learning opportunity too. So, but I hear exactly what you're saying there, Mike. And that school districts will have to be proactive in essentially making sure that students don't fall through the cracks with this as well.
Yeah, that's what Jen in Bitter Lake basically said. This will be helpful for my son who's doing well in school and sometimes needs a mental health day. However, I worry about students who are already struggling academically. Will they slip through the giant crack this opens up? And Mark in Arbor Heights says, not requiring a doctor's note is a good thing, but a parent's note should be required. At that age, I definitely would have abused a system like that.
That's a good point, though. A parent's note, I do understand. When I see this bill, I just see someone taking a stand for kids. I think that, originally this is born from the pandemic and the virtual fatigue that students were having and all of that stuff. Now we're transitioning to kids coming back to school and being afraid to be at school because of all of the stuff that's happening with the shootings. And I mean, kids are going through so much at this time right now that if we have a chance to give them a break, I'd say give them a break. And I know that I'm super, super Seattle specific, Bill, but I work with high schoolers in Seattle right now. And in Seattle public schools, if you're in high school, they accept your assignments at any point during the semester. So you could do them on the very last day or any day, you could take them. So the idea that kids actually have to be in class every single day to get through school, it's becoming a fallacy, just like the idea that we need to sit in a cubicle to do our jobs at work. Like, the world is changing, and this feels like a positive shift.
And I guess just jumping off this point, I mean, I think the other thing is interesting about Josh's point about truancy and like missing school. Like, it used to be like a badge of honor if you had perfect attendance. Like, in my community, if you had perfect attendance, or in the Yakima School District, if you had perfect attendance, like, you got a bike. I mean, that's how like attendance is like very much emphasized. And I feel like the pandemic did change that. Like, oh, hey, maybe we should, like, if you're sick, you should stay home, and I think this bill is great because it's equating mental health with physical health. Like, mental health is just as important as physical health. So if you have an issue, you should address it. You should have time to stay home and like help, and the parents should work with your kids to like address those issues.
Couple more notes from listeners, and then we'll move on to other week in review topics. So thanks to everybody who wrote in. Carolyn in Capitol Hill says, being able to skip class because of mental health reasons without having to explain to an adult what I was dealing with would have been a huge lifesaver for me in high school. How many classes did I struggle through, learning nothing, just feeling more on the brink of a crisis? Kids and young adults are very smart, and we should treat them with more respect. Obviously, this type of proposal should come with vastly more counselors and funding for resources in schools who can be reaching out to students who are taking many mental health days. It probably isn't, says Carolyn, which is annoying because it means the onus for navigating this falls mostly on the students. But we discussed there are some measures in place to try to avoid that situation. And finally, I'll just add, we've got so many more comments here from our community feedback club, but I'll add Wendy, who says, I support this idea. Mental health days should be for adults too. Calling in well. Companies need to respect employees' personal lives. Sort of, Mike, to the point you're making, this is not just about kids.
I second that. All of our companies should give us unlimited mental health days. Yes.
I love that idea.
Well, to join, by the way, just in case you would like to also share your opinions with us on KUOW, we have this community feedback club, and you can sign up for that. Just text the word club to area code 206-926-9955. I'll give that number again. And that's when we have you on our list, then I'll send out questions every week, and we get great responses like that. So again, text the word club to area code 206-926-9955. Okay, thanks to everybody who weighed in. Thanks for Mike and everyone else, Mai and Josh, for letting us know about this new state law. It doesn't really take super effect for until the school year. This is happening. It's officially kicking in here right at the end of the school year. So we'll be talking about this more as we head into school year 2022-23. You're listening to Week in Review. We're live streaming the show, so you can watch us on YouTube and Facebook. Just search KUOW Public Radio. And then I'll be right back with Mai Hoang from Crosscut, South Seattle Emeralds, Mike Davis, and the Kitsap Suns, Josh Farley, in a moment.
.949 KUOW, Seattle's NPR news station. It's 12:20, 64 degrees in Seattle, and we are expecting rain today.
Support for KUOW comes from Crosscut Civic Cocktail, connecting community leaders and the public to explore issues facing the Northwest. This month, Attorney General Bob Ferguson on the possible reversal of Roe v. Wade and its local impact. June 22nd at Town Hall and online. Details at crosscut.com/events.
And from Bill and Paula Clapp in partnership with Seattle Foundation, saluting the Seattle YMCA for providing summer camps to over 3,000 young people last year. The Y is now expanding these camps to reach even more youth. Learn more about how to help at seattleymca.org/camp.
It's KUOW's Week in Review. I'm Bill Radke. Mike Davis and I are in Seattle, and Josh Farley's in Bremerton, and Mai Hoang is in Yakima. Mai, we had the Folklife Festival here in Seattle return after a pandemic absence. Spokane is bringing back a couple of its biggest festivals. How's that going?
So yeah, I guess the two big events that I think when people think of Spokane is Bloomsday, which is an 8K road race that was held in May 1st. They had it after 2 years of doing it virtually, and then Hoopfest,
like a virtual road race.
Yeah, virtual. And then Hoopfest, which is coming up in about 2 weeks, is coming back after a 2-year hiatus. They tried to have it last year, and they actually moved it from their usual spot in June to September in hopes of, kind of waiting out the pandemic. And then you guys can kind of guess what happened around September. It was a little thing called the Delta variant. So it was very heartbreaking. They ended up having to cancel like weeks before. So it's a pretty big deal for both of these events. They bring tens of thousands of people to Spokane between the participants, volunteers, spectators.
Yeah, I knew about Bloomsday. I actually didn't know about Hoopfest, although I found out it's a huge deal. Mike, you knew about it. Mike, you're looking at me like I'm shaking your head.
How dare you, Bill? You are in come on, Hoopfest. Like, I don't know. Hoopfest was just such a big part of so many of our lives just growing up around here. Like, you get to go down there. It's like a whole weekend thing. You get to spend the night. There's like thousands and thousands of teams. I know, Maya, you got all the details, but I'm sorry, Bill, that was just egregious that you did not know about Hoopfest.
Not a basketball fan.
Yeah, I guess not. It's a 3-on-3 basically, and it's outdoors, right? I mean, speaking of the pandemic, it's not indoors.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's right in the middle. To speak to Mike's point, Hoopfest is so beloved because literally you're bringing all these teams in the middle of downtown Spokane. So, but pre-pandemic in 2019, there were 6,000 teams of totaling 24,000 players playing in downtown Spokane. I'm just think about the visual here, and then that's just the participants. And then there's all the spectators, family, friends. I interviewed a player for this story, and he was talking about growing up, all his cousins from Montana would come up, and he joked that his house was a hostel for all his cousins who were playing in the tournament. So, Mike's right. It's a big deal. Spokane's kind of building this reputation as like a basketball town. It's the home of Gonzaga. So yeah, it was really heartbreaking for a lot of people that this event was canceled.
Yeah, I was curious, if we know yet whether we have a labor report today showing 8.6% inflation in May from the previous year. I would think the high price of gas, it's not a short drive to Spokane from the Seattle area. No. And I was curious if there was any chance that maybe the high prices, whether gas or otherwise, would affect attendance this year.
It definitely will. The Spokesman Review just published a story this week. They interviewed Riley Stockton. And by the way, Riley is the nephew of John Stockton, famous Gonzaga player, Utah Jazz
Bill,
player.
You know who that is?
Yeah.
Vaccine skeptic. Yes, I do.
Yeah, John is known for more things now, but
Gary Payton said John Stockton was the toughest defender he ever played against, and a dirty player as well.
Oh wow. Okay. And speaking of Gary Payton, his son's in the NBA Finals right now. So lots of family ties happening in basketball. So Riley did an interview, and he said that they're expecting 3,500 teams, which is still a lot of teams, but that's quite a drop from 6,000, which is what we saw in 2019. So yes, Josh, definitely definitely inflation likely playing that, but definitely just people's hesitation about the pandemic. In my story, I interviewed one of what's known as a perennial, and those are the runners who's run in every Bloomsday since the first one in 1977. His name's Roger Aldrich. And Roger's saying, hey, I'm 74 years old. Like, I'm really happy the event's coming back, but I just don't feel comfortable, being, downtown Spokane with thousands of people without masks. Even if it's outdoors. So he opted to run it virtually, and he lives in Spokane. So he ran the course like the week before. So there's still people not rushing back to events yet, and that's going to impact numbers.
I know that your article mentioned some of the economic impacts of missing both of these events for Spokane. Does Spokane have a plan to bounce back? If these events come back and they come back slower, what is the city going to do?
I think the goal right now is definitely just having the event show up. I think that for this year, it's just an achievement, especially for Hoopfest, when they were so close last year and they had to pull out the last minute. Just having the event is kind of the main focus right now. But yeah, I think there's definitely a conversation. I know when I was talking to the Bloomsday folks, they're definitely talking about like, okay, we gotta, up our marketing, get some strategies out there. And I think what's really interesting about Spokane, WSU actually did a study about events in Spokane. And one of the things they said that was great about Spokane is that they had like kind of this community group. So like police, city officials, Parks and Rec, they met regularly. So they're meeting like every month to talk about like not just these two events, but like events in like the greater Spokane area. And so they're like aware of kind of the situation, they're aware of numbers. So they're already working together just to bring the events back. So I expect they're going to be working together to figure out how to, get more people to participate in the future.
I think if Top Gun Maverick is any indication, I think people aren't afraid of getting out and about. And I think it seems like if COVID is not going to be the reason, seems like.
All right, Spokane Hoop Fest, which bills itself the biggest outdoor 3-on-3 basketball tournament on earth. Josh, you were concerned about inflation, but you're not saying the basketballs are going to be overinflated. Those are set to a certain standard, and that's not going to change. I just want to reassure people. And then Bloomsday, which is it's a James Joyce party, which happens all in lots of countries with, readings and costumes. Why it's a race in Bloomsday, I don't know, but it's a long-standing Spokane.
Yeah. So yeah, it literally was, they had an Olympic marathoner who's living in Spokane just decided, hey, let's gather downtown. And the first race was like 2,000 people. So, and then it kind of grew exponentially from there.
Is it still called the Lilac Bloomsday race?
The official name is like Lilac Bloomsday Run, but like nobody knows it as Lilac Bloomsday. And like, and I almost think most people who participate in Bloomsday probably don't even know the James Joyce reference. They only know like, oh, that's just they just know I'm going to be running 8.k miles downtown Spokane. That's what they're thinking about. So, right. So no literary readings during the race, unfortunately.
I finished this long race. I feel heroic like Ulysses, and I don't know why that's coming to mind. Okay, so next topic on Week in Review. How many times have we discussed this in the last 2 years? Seattle has this open wound, and it's hard to heal it. And the behavior of some city officials make that wound harder to close. When the Black Lives Matter protests were heating up 2 summers ago, Seattle police decided to abandon their East Precinct building on Capitol Hill. After the police left, demonstrators turned that area into a so-called autonomous zone of protest and mutual aid. At first, the mayor jokingly called it the Summer of Love, but the city just paid a settlement to the father of a man who was killed in that protest zone. Some residents and business owners say they were harassed and vandalized there with no police protection. So, who ordered the officers to leave their post? Well, the police chief at the time, Carmen, has said that she was not involved in that planning.
It was a command decision from, and these things happen. I want to preface this by saying, often there's dynamic situations. Sure. Things are happening in the middle. You're in charge and you're making decisions. And somebody, I think people question, why weren't they talking to you about it if you're the chief? And I said, I would have preferred that happen, to be honest with you. But also, there's lots of things that happen in the field that are happening right then.
But the South Seattle Emerald has obtained text messages that show that Chief Best knew more about the East Precinct plans than she has let on. And those are just the texts that still exist. The Axios reports that Chief Best now admits to deleting texts from her government-issued phone. So, Mike Davis, let's start with the police department abandoning the East Precinct. This is 2 years ago. Why does it matter what the police chief knew about that and when she knew it?
Well, I think it always matters when the chief of police lies to the public and lies to the media. I mean, you just played that clip right there. I mean, there was also like Fox News reports where she gave direct quotes to reporters that literally made it seem like protesters just took the precinct, but that's not really what happened. And as you just mentioned, abandoning the East Precinct is what led to that whole area becoming that autonomous zone, becoming the CHOP. And in that settlement that you just mentioned, taxpayers had to pay $500,000 in a wrongful death settlement for a 19-year-old young man who was shot in that zone. And in that lawsuit from his father, a lawsuit in which Mayor Durkin, Councilmember Sawant, and the city of Seattle were all named. I mean, that's literally what the suit was for, was because SPD abandoned the precinct. That area became the CHOP, and there was no policing, no protections, and it led to an unsafe situation where a young man lost his life. So yes, it matters, and it still matters to this day. And I think a larger point that matters is that Chief Best deleted those text messages. She said that they were transitory, whatever she meant by that. But in the state of Washington, that's a felony. Deleting public records is a felony. So if she deleted those texts the same way that we know Mayor Durkin deleted texts, that's a crime. But again,
I want to be clear about that. My understanding, the reporter Lewis Cam from Axios was on Soundside yesterday, KOW's noon interview show, and was saying that apparently public officials can delete transitory or just sort of they can make some judgments about what's not necessary to keep. However, to your point, I believe that if there is a lawsuit or a public records request, and by the way, public records requests are pretty constant, then they are not allowed to, it's not up to them to make that judgment. Do I have that right?
You do have that right. And I think the reason why a lot of folks are coming hard at the idea that Chief Best was deleting those text messages is because she was deleting those messages during 2020 in the height of the George Floyd protest. It's really hard to determine what is and is not transitory when the city's on fire. So like it was just a really, really, really bad timing. And I will pass this on to my colleagues who appear to be chomping at the bit to get in here. But I just want to say we have a $500,000 settlement for the young man that got killed. The city attorney's office had to pay $400,000 for forensic analysis into missing text messages from city leaders. And then the Seattle Times sued the city over these lost text messages and missing records. And that was another $200,000 settlement. So we're talking about $1 million that taxpayers in Seattle had to pay that are all related to this time with missing text messages and lack of accountability over who did and didn't abandon the precinct. So we can parse through who did what all we want to, but at the end of the day, taxpayers are out $1 million over all of this misjudgment, and who in leadership is ever going to be held accountable.
Yeah. So I have like 2 points I wanted to kind of jump in on. So number one, I think it matters because there was a huge talking point, as Mike pointed out, that, these protesters just took over and like they had no choice and there was no intention, or as Carmen Best pointed out. But I mean, I think those texts that we do have do show that there was an intended abandonment. that for me, that's what sticks out, because the storyline had been like, oh, CHOP kind of just overwhelmed them and they just had to leave. And that clearly doesn't seem to be the case. Do I have that right?
You have that right. And I'll also point out that those leaked text messages were not from the phone of Chief Best either. Those were missing, but other phones had those texts. So.
And it seems like every time I show up on this show, like we're always talking about somebody deleting text. Like I feel like the last time I was on Week in Review, we were talking about the redistricting, one of the redistricting commission members deleting texts. So I feel like this issue keeps happening over and over again. We have officials who keep like trying to walk around the rules and being like, oh, I didn't mean to do this, but like they know what they're doing. Like the fact just keeps happening over and over again. It's like I'm kind of tired of it, honestly. Like there needs to be some sort of accountability and punishment for deleting text. Like it's becoming a problem.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I've obviously any journalist that's worked in the state knows we have a public records law for a reason. I can't even count how many records requests I've had to make over the years, but I think I'm not sure how this is going to work out in the litigation, but one thing that I'm really watching for as a reporter, and I think other reporters should watch for this too, is what are the effects and ramifications afterwards. We have this law for a reason. In this case, it appears at least to my reading, that they're communicating in some ways almost like a back channel. If you know that you can text and then you can delete, if it's transitory or whatever verbiage you choose to use, you're essentially saying, our law enforcement agencies, our government leaders and their lawyers are following, essentially closely. I think they're following this to see what they can and can't get away with and how they communicate. And I think our legislature was clear. The citizens of the state believe in the law, and we as journalists use this law to hold our, leaders accountable. And maybe we'll see something of a testing of the guardrails here in terms of what the results of the litigation are.
And I think,
yes, go ahead, Mai.
I just am finding it interesting too, is like when you hear these officials talk about deleting texts, they almost make it sound like they're doing you a favor. Like, oh, I'm just deleting these incidental texts, so you don't have to read them, right? But like, I don't mind. I mean, I've done like a lot of public records, like everyone here, and like that's just part of the job. Like, if I have to read through, what's up, hi, all those incidental texts to get to the good stuff, that's just part of the job of going through public records. So yeah, that I don't feel like, I know that they have the discretion to delete texts that are incidental, but it's just easier if you want to be above the law and just be above it. Like, just leave them and then let the reporters go through the text. It's fine.
Mike, both Josh and Mai have mentioned accountability. So that's my next question to you. What happens next? Is there going to be an investigation? Is anybody going to be held accountable for deleting public records?
Funny you should ask. Well, there was another report from Axios, and, they reached out to Mayor Harrell, the city attorney's office, and Bob Ferguson. All they did was point fingers at each other. They all leaned on the next person to be able to do something. The mayor said, that's not his job. The city attorney's office wanted to kick it up. Big shot Bob seems like he's not going to touch it unless Inslee tells him to. So no, I don't think there's going to be accountability. And it's hard to see why there will be accountability. These are the same groups of people who would be the ones deleting messages. I can't see them coming down on this like that. It's just, I don't know, man. No, Bill, I don't think that there's any hope that we're going to see any accountability. I think the best thing that we could do is just keep public pressure. I think the journalists, a major shout out to Carolyn Bick at the Emerald. They're doing amazing work. There was some great reporting out of Axios. I seen a great conversation that came from KUOW. It's on all of us just to keep pressing the issue, and hopefully we won't see things like this happen in the future. But as for looking back, no, I don't think there will be any accountability for anything that happened in 2020.
Well, and I would just add, as journalists, when we're making records requests and doing these kinds of things, remember there's a two-way or more communication that's occurring, and oftentimes I'm seeing some nods about you sometimes see the other side and sometimes the other side doesn't delete them, and oftentimes our local governments have to pay out because you ask for them, they don't have the record, but you actually had the record. See what I'm saying? So, I think there's other ways to get at this, and maybe we're not done. Maybe we haven't heard the last of what happened in 2020 on this case.
I hope not. But just one last point, it really sucks when we see leaders, when we finally get quote unquote accountability, like the Seattle Times. I guess you can call that accountability, but it's the taxpayers that have to pay. Like they delete the messages, they destroy the records, and then the journalists say, hey, you can't do that, and you can sue, but it's not them that gets punished, it's the taxpayer, it's the people that they're supposed to be serving in the first place. So the system just has a lot of flaws within itself.
All right, that's just deleted texts. What is going to happen if our public officials find out about burner phones? Let's not even tell them about that. So thank you for the update. You're listening to Week in Review on KUOW. That's Mike Davis, opinions editor at South Seattle Emerald. We've got Josh Farley here, Kitsap Sun's military and Bremerton reporter. We're going to talk about both the military and Bremerton here in just a moment after a short break. We've got Mai Hoang, Crosscut Central and Eastern Washington reporter, and we're streaming it all on Facebook and YouTube. Search KUOW.org, and don't go away. Quick break and then more Week in Review.
Support for KUOW comes from Crawl Pros. Recent rains can expose groundwater issues that can affect crawl spaces, creating toxic mold and structural damage. A sump pump can reroute water out and away from a home. More information available at crawlpros.com.
I'm Paul Henley, host of BBC NewsHour. We speak to a friend today of the Moroccan man sentenced to death for fighting in Ukraine, and to a filmmaker testifying in the inquiry into the January the 6th riots in Washington, D.C.
BBC NewsHour this afternoon at 1 o'clock, right after Weekend Review on 94.9 KUOW Seattle.
Support for KUOW comes from the Port Angeles Fine Arts Center and the Summertide Solstice Art Festival, an outdoor event featuring new art and poetry installations, live music, and nature art activities. Saturday, June 18th from 1 to 5 p.m. Learn more at pafac.org.
KUOW's Week in Review here. I'm Bill Radke with South Seattle Emerald's Mike Davis, Crosscut's My Hoang, and Kitsap Sun's Josh Farley. So Seattle's got the Smith Tower. Tacoma has the Glass Museum. Bremerton's got that giant green crane. Josh, is it considered a landmark, an icon?
That's right. All of the above, I would say. It's on the National Historic Registry. Anybody who's traveled to Bremerton, probably by car as well, definitely as by ferry, knows this green steel structure. It's 25 stories tall, weighs 2,400 tons. It hasn't been used in about 30 years, but it was built during the New Deal, during a revitalization of the shipyards around the country. It was built, whopping $500,000 was spent, and the same workers that constructed it in Pennsylvania had just finished the Empire State Building. So it has a lot of history, and it's also really important to the community. I know this is, some people might not believe me, but I've heard from many residents here that sort of view the Hammerhead as our Space Needle in some ways. So the Navy says it essentially stands in the way of progress. And this week they announced that it's going to be torn down to make way for essentially for new facilities, new dry docks. The Navy is going to be spending billions of dollars here to prepare the next generation of nuclear powered vessels, mainly aircraft carriers, submarines, to make sure they can be maintained, and they need room. And this train also is very old, and it has a lot of work that it needs. The Navy would have to invest a lot of money. So
it's not a working crane, though. You say it needs what? What does it need? It's just standing there, right?
Well, when you think about the kind of weight that you're dealing with, you think about it's essentially a complex structure that you have to put money into. It's funny. A few years ago, I actually did. Speaking of public records requests, I found out. We anybody familiar with the mothball fleets? So where we just keep vessels and that are done. Their time is over. They're just waiting to be dismantled. It's like $250,000 a year for a floating aircraft carrier just to be maintained. More than that now, probably. That was a few years ago. So in terms of icons, it's important to the city. It's important to the region and to the shipyard. It kind of represents that, industrial spirit, helped to win, World War II, and has helped keep the Navy afloat. But I really made me think a lot about our icons in our area. We've lost a lot as well. You think about the Kalakala. Old timers will remember this Art Deco shaped ferry. I know you know it, Bill. It was never saved. And we also had the USS Missouri here, where the World War II essentially was ended. The Japanese surrendered on its decks in Tokyo Bay, and USS Missouri, of course, wasn't destroyed. It was just taken to Hawaii. It's not here either. And so the Hammerhead is kind of a continuing sort of tradition, if you will, of getting rid of some icons in our area. And of course, as a society, we have to decide what we can keep, what we can afford to keep. And the Navy, of course, has a mission ahead of it that it believes is important to sustain itself going forward in this world in the 21st century.
I got questions. Any questions, panel?
Well, what are they going to replace it with?
Good question. Okay, so good question. So the cranes that operate now are not as heavyweight. They don't require as much steel. There are still a lot of them, but there are definitely more modern versions. This crane particularly moved, essentially giant guns on heavy cruisers and battleships. It's just really not necessary anymore. So the main thing is, one of the Navy's proposals is they want to build a giant new dry dock. And within this dry dock, they'd be able to essentially the newest type Gerald Ford class aircraft carrier. It's essentially the big super carriers you see planes take off and landing. Again, I reference Top Gun Maverick.
Top Gun number 2, so reference number 2 on today's.
I haven't seen the film myself, but and then submarines as well. We have new classes of submarines. So in any case, it basically needs the footprint. It needs the space to accommodate it.
So my thought, I know we're talking about like the Navy but I guess my thought is like, are they once they demolish the crane, is there anything left that they can kind of preserve for like a museum, or like just as some sort of mark of history that this was like the entryway to Bremerton for a long time?
For sure. That's a great question too. We're still asking. I heard back from the Navy this morning, and that will be to be determined. Normally with these, certainly with a lot of the old ships, this is a lot of steel we're talking about, and most of the time it goes and it's cut up and used for something else in the future. But there could be something to be saved. People who've traveled to Bremerton, might remember the old Minette Bridge that used to be here, and they did save a railing of that before that was replaced. Again, some old timers would say another icon that was lost. But so it is possible that something could be saved from the crane.
Y'all lose a lot of icons. You just mentioned like 4 or 5 icons that Bremerton has lost.
Yeah, I know.
Bremerton iconoclastic, I believe.
Iconoclastic, exactly. So I think this speaks though to a wider, conversation that we all have. Look in the city of Seattle with the battle over, preserving buildings and what do we keep and what do we get rid of, and what is in the way of progress and what is something worth being saved to remember for the future. These are things all of our communities, no matter where you are in Puget Sound or around the country or around the world, grapple with.
Yeah, I'm glad we saved Hoopfest.
Yes. With us. Why? Just a couple more questions about you. By the way, if you've taken a ferry, the state ferry into Bremerton, you've floated right. It's right there, right past the giant. I didn't know it was called Hammerhead. I knew about the giant green crane. Why was it built in Pennsylvania? We have steel out here. Why did they have to take it through the Panama Canal? Why didn't they build it here?
Great question. I did some research on this, and the Dravo Company of Pennsylvania, again, fresh off of the Empire State Building project, built it on an island in Pennsylvania because they were that good at it. They knew how to do it. Not a single person was injured or died when they constructed it, and it was cheaper for them to build the pieces, take it by rail from Philadelphia to Baltimore, and then ship it by sea through the Panama Canal. And then they just put it right on the pier and they assembled it like Legos. And in 5 months' time, it was ready to go. And of course, the rest is history.
Okay, they were good at it. That's fair. Finally, is this a done deal?
I think it's fair to say it's a done deal. It's the Navy's land. It's the Navy's land. The shipyard. They will have a public comment, which right now people can chime in. There's a website that's been created, and they certainly want to have the feedback.
June 23rd, 5:30 p.m. public comment.
There you go. Yeah, there's public comment that people can make. But I think, as I said before, in the conversations I'm having, there are people that have a lot of, they're very sad about this. But at the same time, again, the Navy has a priority. It has a, they would say it's, the mission here has to come before this piece of history. Could it be moved? I don't know. It's an old hulking, bunch of steel that might be tricky and might be more costly than it's worth. So we might be losing something, and it just so happened it was this week that they chose to make the formal announcement.
Okay, then let's talk about from a giant piece of steel to a tiny piece of tin. I didn't actually know it was tin, Mai. We're talking about Mai is over in wine country in Yakima. I knew that some wine cellars use screw caps instead of corks, but there are other changes that I only know about to Washington wine bottles and other wine bottles because I read your Crosscut article, and it includes the glass and the little cap. I didn't know they were called capsules either. Will you please fill us in?
Yeah, I actually have a prop here. Just happens. Yeah, so this is actually one of the wineries I interviewed for Tourity Cellars. They're in Wapato, and so this
She's
thing
holding
right
the
here.
bottle. Yeah, you're indicating the neck of the bottle.
Yeah, and so this part here is called the capsule. So so that is what we're talking about. Yeah, so actually I was at this winery and I was interviewing the owner, and she's like, you should really like ask about wine packaging because it's changing. And so that's how I kind of got into this story. And yeah, so this winery, this is not a great example because it's still on here, but they have a line. They were kind of having these conversations about packaging. So they were talking about like, packaging, I think before it was very much like driven by like aesthetics and tradition. Like, let's have a heavy wine bottle with a cork. It looks classy, it shows like you have the stuff inside is high quality. And, as this one winery kind of started having conversations with their customers, this part is actually, you could actually recycle this in some places.
Again, you're pointing to, if the listeners can't picture the capsule, it's,
I'm sorry. So there's a tin capsule. I'm sorry. Okay, you can see it on the live stream, but you can't see it on the radio. So the tin capsule, it kind of covers up the top of the bottle, and so it's called the capsule.
Has a foil wrap on it.
And it's a foil wrap on it, and it's made of tin or aluminum. So So what they were finding when they were talking to their customers, their customers just kind of threw it away. Like so there's a lot of waste and cost. And so, their supplier in France were actually having labor issues. So it made it kind of more difficult to access these items. And so for some of their line, they started, having some bottles where they don't have any of these tin or aluminum capsules. And then another winery I interviewed, Kiona in Benton City, last year they started experimenting with lighter bottles because, again, the carbon footprint, is massive, the amount of energy to just make the bottle, to transport it, to deliver the wine. They have customers outside of Benton City, so they're shipping wine. So those costs add up. That's a lot of gas. So they started experimenting with lighter bottles, and this feedback has generally been like, oh, we didn't even notice. Like some of them just didn't even notice that, oh, you guys were using heavier bottles. And so they're making these changes for cost savings, for supply chain reasons, for sustainability. And then, that's just the traditional bottle. And then there's the conversation about alternative packaging. So like cans, at the supermarket, you see those like those cans of a wine now, or you see the bag in the box wine, and like that's becoming an option. So
Mike, would you show up at a party and present a thin, light glassed bottle and with a screw cap or no capsule on it? Would you make that?
Bill, if I'm in the store and I pick up that bottle of wine and that glass isn't heavy, I'm going to assume that they're trying to give me less wine. So I'm going to put that one back. First of all, you're not going to trick me with that. But the box, no. You can't show up to a social gathering with the box of wine. They're going to think that you bought that at the gas station on the way over there. Like it's just, aesthetic matters with wine. It matters.
That was
Mike's a traditionalist, huh?
Yes, that's what your article was about tradition, being a traditionalist, Mai. That matters too.
Yeah, I didn't expect it to be among our panelists. I thought, we'd be a little enlightened by, no, just kidding. But the counter argument I'd make, Mike, is that actually you're doing your host a favor, because with boxed wine, it turns out that once you open it, you can actually still drink it for several months. So if there's still wine left over, your host can actually drink it like for several more months. So you're actually doing them a favor if you bring a box.
Now you're bringing me back. You're bringing me back around. That I like that. I like that a lot.
Josh, have you been recycling your tin capsules all along?
Always, Bill. Yeah. And I have to be honest, I'm going to join the tradition bandwagon here. The one other thing that I can't, this was in your article too, I can't, the sensation of blasting off the cork on champagne. There's nothing like it. And whenever we celebrate a good story, a life event, whatever you have going, that's some cause for there. It goes with the drink. How do you not blast that champagne?
You're so right.
Yeah, now what?
Well, to be fair, John, I mean that's how I ended my story. Was this woman at the wine cellar in Portland was such an advocate for all these things, but then she says in the end, I still like popping the cork with my champagne bottle. So yeah, so I don't think traditionalism is going away. It's just that it's not the only option.
That heavy bottle, it just feels like, I don't know, like monks made this thing centuries ago, and it was dusty, regal. That's my experience.
Wow, I did not expect this resistance to change here.
Hidebound. We are hidebound. Okay, it's time to start wrapping up the show. Week in review. I always want to leave listeners with something to smile about. I'm smiling because I'll turn it over to you here, but I want to say I'm smiling because we're going to do a live event devoted to our new podcast, which is called KUOW Shorts. My short series is up now called Subtext, What Goes Unsaid. And the latest episode is about the unsaid messages behind the so-called body positivity movement. That's up right now. It's good. Find KUOW Shorts wherever you get your podcast. And the live event is going to be at McCaw Hall Thursday, July 7th. And we're going to show you how to have fearlessly curious conversations in dangerously divided times. So bring us your own personal dilemma, and we'll show you how to confront it, or perhaps passively avoid it, or just show up and watch the show on July 7th. I'm smiling about that. Anybody else have a smile to leave us with?
I can say quickly, I know we talked a lot about getting rid of icons. The one I forgot to mention that we're keeping is the Virginia 5. Anybody that goes to South Lake Union knows this vessel. It was born June 11th, 1922, and it's just got out of dry dock and it's back. And they're doing tours and rentals, and you'll hear the steam whistle for what they hope is another 100 years. So that's an icon that's worth keeping, and it's going to be around.
I've been on that boat. Anybody else smiling?
So I'm smiling because I'm at the end of a week of year-round chaos. It's my daughter's last week of school, daughter's last week of dance, daughter's last week of Girl Scouts, and all the events are literally happening this week. So I've been running around as the dance mom, hot dog supplier, fruit buyer. I mean, I'm really tired. So I'm just happy that I made it through this week, to be honest.
I did week in review. That's impressive. Thank you for doing it, all of that. Mike, anything to add?
Yes, of course. Man. It's officially summer. Summer's here. My kid's also out of school, and I mean, it doesn't look like summer, but it is. It's upon us, and any day now we are going to be at the beach in the sand, and it's going to be amazing.
I like your optimism. Thank you, Mike Davis. Heading to the sand. That's the South Seattle Emerald opinions editor there. And we've got Josh Farley, Bremerton reporter, military reporter at the Kitsap Sun, and Crosscut Central and Eastern Washington reporter, Mai Hoang. Mai, thanks for joining us. Thanks to all of you for being Week in Review. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Have a good one, Bill.
Thanks, Bill.
Same to you. Thanks to Kevin Kniestead for producing the show, and Tio Popescu and Juan Pablo Chiquiza giving us social media and live streaming support. Bernard Wallet making it all sound great on the radio board. And have a fantastic week. We'll see you again next week.